Alright guys, welcome to another edition of Technique Tuesday. Today I want to talk to you about smoothing your projects. Smoothing is an essential part of working with clay. If you have cracks, if you have pieces of sort of clay stuck to your project, if it's just general lumpiness, this is something you need to deal with, okay? You can't just let it go and expect to get a good grade on your project. This looks bad, okay? You might be tempted to say, okay, now it's a bowl, so therefore it's done. But you would be very wrong, okay? You need to go through the finishing process to make it look nice. So when you're smoothing, you're going to need a few tools, as always. You will need a metal rib, flexible metal rib. This is not serrated. So the ones we use for scoring, this is not one of those. This is just a plain metal rib. You might need a wooden rib. It's good to have one nearby. And you're going to need a rubber rib. This is flexible, okay? And you can grab one if we have a smaller one. There's lots of different rubber ribs in the bin. You might need a small bowl of water and a sponge. And you might need a spoon. This is for the very last step. You may or may not need this. We'll see. So when you're smoothing, you may be tempted to say, oh, I'm smoothing something. I will just take a wet sponge and wipe and wipe and wipe and wipe and wipe. And I'll put a whole lot of water on my project. It's very important that you know that slippery is not the same as smooth. Okay? Slippery just means it's slippery. It doesn't mean that I've fixed cracks. It doesn't mean that all the lumps and bumps are gone. It just means that now there's a lot of slip on my project, which is not what we want. We want it to actually be level. We want it to actually be smooth, not just slimy, okay? So the sponge is actually one of the last things you're going to use. The first thing you want to use is your metal rib. So when you're working on smoothing with a metal rib, what you do is you curve it and you begin by scraping. And you want to make sure you're actually scraping material off the clay, okay? You're not just kind of laying it gently on there. You need to get in there and really scrape the clay. And what you're trying to do while you're scraping, and you want to scrape in several directions, lots of different directional changes. While you're scraping, you will encounter spots where the scraper is not scraping and spots where it is. You want to keep scraping until everything is the same level, okay? Until everything, you're scraping down the high spots until everything is the same level. So if the scraper's not touching it, keep going. Notice that my clay is not very flexible right now. You want to go through the smoothing process when the clay is stiffened somewhat. It doesn't have to be completely leather hard, but it needs to be somewhat stiff, because if while I'm working with it, I don't want to damage it. If it's too soft, it's going to be hard to work with. So as you go, you might have to knock some of this off just so that you can keep scraping. Make sure that you scrape in several directions. And you always want to make sure that you are removing clay, okay? You are literally removing clay from the surface. Trust me, you are not going to remove enough to damage your pot, unless your pot was very, very, very thin to begin with. If it's that thin, it's probably too thin. But I'm not taking off very much. I'm probably only taking off a few millimeters. So I'll just keep scraping until my whole project is smooth. So see the difference from this side to this side? Look at that. And I want to make sure I scrape the edge as well as the bottom. And I want to scrape the top and eventually I'll scrape the inside. So I'm going to speed things up while I finish scraping this, and then we'll go over the next step. Everything, it looks pretty level now. All my lumps and bumps are for the most part gone, but I still have some marks on the inside from my rib and some little bits of clay out here, and now is when we tackle those items. So this is where you would want to use the the rubber rib. Now the rubber rib has two sides, and I hope you can see this on camera. It's got the side with the writing, and if you look at the edge there, it's curved. And it's got a flat side. Notice how on the edge there's no, you can't see that curve. Curve, no curve. So this curve here, this is what you want to use to smooth your project, okay? You don't really use the flat side. You want to use the curved side up against your clay. And what you do, let me turn this over. What you do is you take that rubber rib, and that does the final smoothing. Notice at no point have I used water on this. I'm strictly using friction. Okay, my clay stays dry while I'm working on smoothing. My rib is not wet. My rib is also dry. Okay, so now that I've smoothed with my metal rib and I've smoothed with my rubber rib, now is when I might go to the sponge. Okay, again, you don't want to use too much water. You just want to use enough to finally wipe off any fingerprints, little excess pieces of clay. Just finalizing your piece. I'm not using a ton of water. I'm just occasionally rinsing out my sponge in my little bowl of water and doing a final smoothing. Okay, but the sponge is one of the last things you do. Alright, that looks pretty good. I could touch this up a little bit more, but there you have it. Okay, now there is one final thing that is kind of optional. Some people like to do it, some people don't. It's your choice, and that's called burnishing. Now burnishing involves using the back of a metal spoon, and you want to do burnishing when the clay is leather hard. This is softer than I would like, but with burnishing, you roll over. Using the back of the spoon, you go over the surface of the clay and you use a circular motion to, it's almost like polishing the clay. It will make it smooth and it'll actually make it glossy. And if you like that look, that's great. What it does is it really flattens out all of the molecules of the clay and gives it a very smooth, glossy look. The problem with burnishing is the drier your clay is, the better chance you have of cracking it or damaging it. So if you're going to burnish, you have to just be very careful about it. Try not to crack your project. Okay? This is not quite dry enough for burnishing, but that's how it works. Okay, so my pot is scraped, smoothed, wiped, and burnished, and it looks much better than it did when I started. So there you have it, that's smoothing. You really should smooth your projects. It will vastly improve your grade. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next Tuesday.